Hello and welcome to Opwall's Field Notes, a podcast created by Operation Wallacea to share stories and insights from our 25 years working in the field. My name is Sophia Wood, Opwall's country manager for Ecuador and director of Friends of Wallacea, and I will be your host for this series. We launched this podcast to shine a light on the world of biodiversity field research and the work of those who dedicate their lives to understanding and protecting our planet. Each month, we have conversations with scientists, community conservationists, and experienced academics about new research, protecting biodiversity, and daily life out in the field. Our guest today is Sara Carlson, who runs Ocean Ventures, a dive and research center on Natewa Bay in Fiji that works alongside Opwall for the marine research portion of our expeditions. Before moving to Fiji to start Ocean Ventures with her partner, Matthew Norman, Sara worked with Opwall for several years, running the U.S. office and leading projects in Mexico, Indonesia, Honduras, and Greece. She became passionate about the ocean at a young age and has been diving avidly since 2009. Sara moved to Fiji nearly 5 years ago and has been living on the Natewa Peninsula ever since, including through the entire pandemic. She and Matthew are passionate about supporting marine conservation by working alongside local communities on the island and have been teaching courses, training divers, and surveying local coastlines throughout the past year. In this episode, we discuss life on a South Pacific island, what makes Fiji's marine life so special, and the future of conservation on these remote islands. All right. Thank you so much for joining me today, Sara. I know we're even on different days, actually.
Well, Bula from Fiji, Sophia. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. And I was about to ask you, since we're taping everything from home, where are you based? So where are you based in Fiji?
Where is home? So our home is based on Benua Levu, which is the second largest island in Fiji. But there's over 333 islands in Fiji. So yeah, we're in the second largest one called Benua Levu.
Awesome. And how long have you been living in Fiji, and what made you decide to move there?
Oh, we moved out here in November 2016, so it's been almost 5 years. My partner Matthew and I, we met on an Opwall expedition in Honduras, and for a while we were thinking that we wanted to do something that was really more directly involved with the ocean. So even though I'd been working with Operation Wallacea for a long time, I always loved the field seasons. So yeah, I just wanted to go somewhere where we could do that kind of year round, and we really just want to have some kind of impact on the ocean in a positive way. And so we heard that this was an opportunity. Opwall was setting up a new marine site in Fiji, and we just kind of took a leap and went for it.
Yeah, and of course, I got to meet you right as you were setting all of this up in 2017, and it's come a really long way since then. But you alluded, yes, yeah. So before you came to Fiji, you worked at Opwall for many years, including setting up our U.S. operation. So how did you first get involved in Opwall, and then how has your role evolved over time?
I first heard about Opwall in 2008 when I was a senior at Lehigh University, and I was just getting ready to graduate. I'd never done study abroad or anything, no real field experience, and my kind of background was more in genetics, but I'd always had a passion for conservation. So I volunteered with them and went out to South Africa and Mozambique in 2009 for 8 weeks. So I was in Kruger National Park in South Africa doing habitat analysis and bird surveys, mostly looking at carrying capacity for elephants within Kruger National Park. And then I went to Mozambique, where the marine site used to be located. And that was my first experience with scuba diving. And I was hooked immediately. And also I was working with Dr. Kane DeLacy doing stereo video surveys of fish populations. So that was a really cool project. And now we're actually using that same technology out here in Fiji. So that's kind of come full circle. So back in 2009, when I was in South Africa, I met Dr. Tim Coles, and he said, "Oh, you seem like a nice American. Do you want a job?" And I was, yes, that would be great. That would be amazing. So back in 2009, the US office, they would be open for a university tour, which is how I got recruited. And then they would shut down, and kind of the Canadian office would take over for all the volunteers that were signed up. So I was working as a team of five in the US office, which used to be based on the Jersey Shore. We were all just involved in the university recruitment. So I was a fundraising advisor, and I would go to different universities and talk to students like me who really wanted to do an Opwall expedition, but then had to pay their own way to go. So I talked to students about grants and just different fundraising activities that they could do, and just trying to help people get out into the field. So that was my role to start. And then Operation Wallacea decided to keep the US office open that year. So I was working alone for a while, and then I was able to kind of hire a team, put a team together. And by basically that first year, we recruited the first US high schools to ever come out on Operation Wallacea trips. It's starting to rain, so it might get a little bit loud. But yeah, so I worked at the US office. We moved the office down to Virginia. And then I left in about 2015 because I wanted to get out into the field a bit more. And that was really to get some more experience in the diving industry.
For anyone listening to the podcast, It is absolutely pouring down rain outside of Sarah's house and very lush and green. So any background noise is due to nature.
Yeah, luckily it'll probably pass quickly. So yeah, after leaving Opwall US back in 2015, Matthew and I traveled and got some more experience in the diving industry. And then Tim contacted us and said, "Look, we're setting up a new site in Fiji, and we'd like you to go there and set up our marine site and be our kind of in-country partner for the diving operations." So that's how it got us here, and now we work with Operation Wallacea as our partners here in Fiji. So it's been a long journey with Opwall. It's about 13 years now, but I love that I'm still involved with it somehow.
And so now you own your own dive center, obviously. So could you tell us a little bit more about Ocean Ventures and what you guys are doing and where it's based?
Yeah, so Ocean Ventures Fiji, my partner Matthew and I founded it in 2017, and we worked as a small diving operation in Natewa Bay, and it's the only dive operation in Natewa Bay. So where we are is it's the largest bay in the South Pacific, and it completely divides this island. So we're 1,000 meters or like 3,000 feet deep in some places, and most of the area is relatively unexplored. So there's some of our dive sites, for example, where no one has been on it on scuba before. They're just local spear fishermen, that type of thing. Interesting for us, and it's also, this island only receives about 5% of Fiji's tourism to begin with. So it's one of those kind of out and a bit more removed places. It's not like what you imagine when you think of Fiji. It's not like the white sandy beaches. It's a very mountainous, volcanic island, which gives it this really unique ecosystem. It gives it the really deep waters, the really healthy shallow reefs, and a lot of endemics in the peninsula. So we're just based about 40 minutes outside of Sabu Sabu, which is our closest town on Natewa Bay.
It must be really beautiful there. I just saw the little glimpse of from outside your house, but I know it's a really beautiful spot. So, diving into some of the Opwall work in Fiji, could you tell us a little bit more about the Fiji site? How long has it been around, and what are the main research questions there?
So Opwall started working in Fiji in 2017. They had gotten in touch with the Nambu Conservation Trust a couple of years before that, which is what brought Matthew and I to Fiji. Tim had put us in touch with the Nambu Conservation Trust, and here they're very interested in, for example, maybe establishing a national park, which in Fiji is slightly difficult because the government doesn't own a lot of the land. It's all locally owned. So they're interested in possibly setting up a national park with their Matsangali land, their ancestral land. So Operation Wallacea started in 2017 doing things like the bird surveys, because there's endemics like the silktail here. Also looking at carbon storage for potential funding. This area and Fiji in general does have a lot of deforestation, both for agriculture and for pine, for mahogany. So it's a kind of crucial time here on Vanuatu to do some biodiversity research and habitat research. And I think Operation Wallacea saw that, and also the local partners were really ready to have someone come in and do some large scale surveys in a place that really hadn't had that before. There just hadn't been the surveys and the raw data. It's just a remote part, so they just really didn't have any background information on it.
Right. And obviously the area where you're working is a remote peninsula on a remote island. So it has really specific species on it that live pretty much nowhere else. So I know Opwall's, only been in Fiji for a few years, so presumably still very much at the beginning of the process of monitoring and tracking the species that are there.
Yes, very much so, but they've already found new species of butterfly, the endemic Natewa swallowtail. So there's definitely, a lot of potential out there. There's a lot of unexplored places. So there could be a lot of potential for new species, and really just trying to lever funding for this area. They're interested in fencing off this peninsula because the island itself is basically only about half a kilometer wide in one spot. So you could fence off that part of the island and then try to eradicate the invasive mongoose and also some of the other invasive pests that it can reduce, like the herpetofauna here. So that there are some large scale projects that could be done with more biodiversity surveys.
That's awesome. Well, obviously I want to jump a little bit from the terrestrial side over to the marine side, since that's where you have been working mostly. And I want to dig into the reefs around Fiji because it's a really special place for diving specifically. So why did you and Opwall decide to come here to study these reefs, and why are Fiji's reefs so special?
Fiji's known to a lot of divers as the soft coral capital of the world. They're known for having healthy soft corals in their shallow reefs and just really colorful diving, and also shark diving as well. That brings a lot of people to Fiji. I mean, even off this island, we've got schooling hammerheads. There's the Rainbow Reef, and then here in Natewa Bay is a bit of a very unusual and unique place because it's a huge bay. It's the largest bay in the South Pacific, but when you go out in a boat, you just don't see any other boats. There's some small like village fishing boats, and that's pretty much it. So a lot of the sites they just don't know what type of coral cover you're working with, what type of fish you're seeing. So it's a unique place because with the very deep water, with it being over 1,000 meters or 3,000 feet deep, we get a lot of cold water upwellings, and we think that's part of the reason the coral reefs are so healthy here. There's coral heads here that are easily as big as a house, and Fiji's got this kind of unique responsibility when it comes to their reefs. Long before like marine protected areas were really a thing, they've been placing what they call tambus on the reef. So this is throughout the country. A lot of times local communities will place a tambu on a reef because they've got a very big sense of ownership of their natural resources and of their reefs. So for example, if a chief passes away, or if they just feel like their fish populations aren't doing so well, they'll establish a tambu, and then nobody can fish off of that reef for the extent of the tambu. So they've been doing kind of locally managed protected areas for centuries already, which is really unique. It's really neat to see that all coming from local initiative from years back. So we see fairly healthy shark populations, which is wonderful. There is a lot of like local spearfishing, but you don't get any like commercial trawlers, any larger boats coming into the bay. So there's a lot of potential for finding both unique species, but also really healthy populations. And that goes for Fiji in general. There's a lot of really healthy coral reefs, really high recruitment for juveniles. So even though we get battered quite frequently by cyclones, there's a lot of new growth. There's a lot of things that make you really hopeful about the reefs in Fiji.
And what's the fishing situation like with the local communities? What kinds of methods do they use? And besides the tambu, what kind of management strategies do they have to ensure that there's enough resources for everybody?
So here in Fiji, most of the fishing monitoring is done by fisheries. Fisheries do have an outpost in Savu, but they don't have a boat, and especially they don't have a boat here in Natewa Bay. So even though Fijian government through fisheries has a lot of standards for like catch size and for certain species that are completely taboo and not supposed to be caught at any time of the year. Enforcing those can be really difficult, especially these days with the tourism industry just completely shut down. A lot of people are fishing the taboo reefs because you have to put food on the table at the end of the day. So it is a difficult time right now, but I think Fijians in general do have a big sense of responsibility. They might not be super wealthy when it comes to like your possessions, but they're very land rich, and they know that that's what they pass down to future generations. So there is a sense of knowing that, you know, your resources are limited, that they're not going to be around forever. And many of the people here today have noticed a decline in fish stocks, have noticed a decline in their reefs. So they're worried about that. As far as techniques go, a lot of it is spearfishing, which is fairly good small scale. There is net fishing, but they have different, you know, requirements and kind of like net sizes that you're allowed to use. And then the industrial fishing, we don't see that at all in Natewa Bay, but it does happen in Fiji's waters. And that can be anything from like long lining. So we've seen, for example, plenty of sharks with hooks in their mouth, especially when you go out and see like the silky sharks out in the blue. But in general, because Fijians have what are called ngoli golis, it's their kind of ownership of the reef. It's their set fishing areas. So different villages will have set reefs that they go to. So yeah, there is very much a sense of ownership of the reef.
Well, you've made a great transition into my next question, which is about land ownership in Fiji, because it's a really interesting and complex system of land ownership in Fiji, where I think it's above 80%. 80% of the land is owned by indigenous communities. For anybody who can't, obviously nobody can see, but Sarah's cat is climbing all over her computer right now. So obviously land ownership in Fiji is a really complex and really interesting topic, because the indigenous communities have a lot of land and, as you said, have a lot of pride over that land. So how does land ownership work in Fiji, and why is it so important for Opwall to work with the local communities that surround our site?
Yes, land ownership in Fiji is really interesting. It's I think it's upwards of 90% of the land is still owned by indigenous Fijians. So even though they were colonized by the British, they really retained a lot of their land and their traditions and their culture, which is amazing. It makes Fiji like this really unique place. But from a conservation point of view, it is slightly difficult if there's, for example, there's no like real public lands. Now, the government doesn't own a large percentage of the country. So in places like the US, for example, you can easily establish national parks. Whereas here in Fiji, it would mean, you know, families or villages giving away or kind of reserving their ancestral land as a protected area. So it's interesting. Different parts of the islands are owned by different people. So, for example, we've been looking into mangrove reforestation recently, and mangroves are all owned by the Lands Department. So that intertidal region is all owned by the Lands Department, whereas the communities will own a lot of the land that the village is based on, and normally up into the mountains as well. So you have these kind of family units called metangalis, which are kind of extended family units. And so they'll normally have a lot of land that's just been passed down from generation to generation. And then there's a bit of freehold land, which is a small percentage, and that's where people will do things like developing. You can sell it, and so that's where a lot of kind of the expat population will live around, like the freehold areas.
Yeah, so a complex place to put together a national park, I guess, if there's not a lot of national land. So how does that impact the way we work with the communities around? Presumably all the land that Opwall works on in Fiji is this Matangali community-owned land.
Exactly. And then it kind of circles back to the kind of that Fijian responsibility for your land. I think they're very aware of their natural resources, and just especially now when tourism, which used to be one of Fiji's main earners, with that completely shut down, really everyone's reverting to farming and just living off the land as they did traditionally. So there's this big sense of having to protect that for future generations. And so there is a lot of interest in conservation projects. There's a lot of interest in things like replanting mangroves, in stopping logging. So at least in this area that Operation Wallacea is working in, several of the Matangali have already agreed to kind of put their land into this reserve, into this national park. So it's pretty easy to get Fijians turned on to the idea of protecting the land that they have, because it's something that's already ingrained in them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, so speaking of Fiji as a tourist destination, Fiji is kind of marketed as the world's paradise. But I know, working on a small South Pacific island brings its own unique challenges. So what have been some of the things that surprised you about working in Fiji? And what do you most love about working there? And finally, is there anything you wish you'd known before you moved there?
Oh, so much. We really didn't know that much about Fiji before coming out here for the first time. And then we moved straight into a small village in a really remote part of the country. So we were really thrown into things. But it was a really fast learning curve and a really amazing way to learn about a different country. And so I think in the beginning, we were really intimidated by just the whole process of getting set up. Fiji's ranked really low on the list of countries as far as ease of doing business and ease of starting up a business, just because we've got so many different government departments and there's not much communication between them. But also we live completely off the grid. So that has been a challenge, but also it's been amazing for me just to go from a place where, I used to have electricity at the flick of a switch, and now we've got solar lights and we collect rainwater. So if we have a dry spell, we might not have water for several days or weeks. So that's presented a whole new kind of appreciation for all of these resources that I used to take for granted. I used to have long hot showers, and now I'm just happy if we can have a quick cold shower. But that makes doing things a bit more difficult as well. When you're in a remote area, you really have to be completely self-reliant. And we learned that with things like equipment, with things like generators. You really have to kind of know what you're doing. You have to learn everything yourself. When you're in a place that's so remote and something goes wrong, you're the person who has to fix it. So it's been empowering. We've learned a lot of skills we never thought we were going to ever learn, but it's been such an adventure because of that. And I think probably both of our favorite part about working here is just the people that we've met along the way and the people that we work with. Because things are tough, conditions are tough, people are really quick to help you. It's a very supportive community, because maybe if you have water this week and you don't next week, it's the people around you who are going to help you. If your car gets stuck in the mud down a random dead end in the most remote part of Fiji, like we did a couple days ago, then you just wait for the next car to come by with a chain and pull you out, and that's wonderful, and they'll do that. It's just very genuine and very supportive, because everyone needs it from time to time here. So it's made me a lot better at asking for help, which I could never really do before. And from our business side of view, it just means that we've moved really slowly, and that establishing relationships with the people around us has been really important. And that's also been really exciting. We in Fiji too, kind of, even though technically the reefs aren't owned by anyone, if we want to go and start diving and start bringing people to a new reef, we go to the village that has the ownership of that reef, and we do a sevu sevu. So we bring Kava and do a presentation, and then from then on, they basically open the village to you. It's really wonderful. You're kind of adopted into the community once you've done that traditional step. So,
and
for example,
what's Kava for listeners who've never heard of it? What's Kava?
So Kava, or Yangona, as it's the root crop is known here. It's the Kava that people drink is actually the roots of a tree, and it gives you kind of like a more of a sleepy effect. It's not alcoholic, it's not narcotic, but it's a traditional drink that people here have been drinking over centuries. It's really big in the South Pacific. And it's actually the biggest cash crop that we have in Fiji. So a lot of people are farming for Yangona, farming for Kava. So Kava, when you present it to like a chief, for example, it's normally a bundle of roots that you've dried out roots that you're presenting. And that's pounded and mixed with water to produce the Kava that you're drinking. So we did a sevu sevu. A sevu sevu is when you basically give Kava, give Yangona to either the Turanganikoro, like the headman of a village, or a chief. And it's kind of your introduction, your proper way to start a meeting. So even the NGOs here, even big companies will do that type of thing. It's really important to kind of keep these traditional practices going. For example, when we did a sevu sevu, when we moved into this house, the closest village is about a half an hour walk away. And so we did a sevu sevu to the Turanganikoro, and we were invited to a wedding to do this, and we didn't know the couple getting married, and they sat us at the front row of the church, and they sat us at the head table. So it's just that's what you can expect when working in these really remote locations. You really kind of get this authentic, really genuine experience of really working with the communities directly.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, my first season was in Fiji, and I experienced very similar things. The Fijians are generally considered the kindest people on earth, and I was invited to a funeral in the village within 2 weeks there, and I was also sitting in the front row of the church choir. So I can very much relate to that feeling, and it's a very loving community there. You did mention the tourism drop off this year because Fiji's borders are still completely closed due to COVID, because there's not really any COVID there, but obviously Fiji's a big tourist economy. So what have been the implications of the lack of tourism, or what has been the impact of the lack of tourism in Fiji this year? Obviously, not only on the economy, but also on these conservation projects that obviously to some extent also depend on tourist income.
Yeah, it's been a very difficult time. The borders, Fiji's borders have been closed for over a year now, but we've also gone almost a year without any community cases of COVID. So they just cracked down hard, and they knew that if it got around here, we just wouldn't have been able to combat it that well. The medical facilities really just aren't capable of that type of number. So the borders have been closed. A lot of tourism operations have shut down completely. That means a lot of people have been out of work for over a year now. So that meant that a lot of Fijians are going back from working in the tourism industry to farming. So many people have left the cities, for example, and moved back to their family lands, back to villages and remote places like this. So it's had a big impact. And I mentioned before, but there's with the tambus, and also with kind of areas of forest that they were once, not using now, because people have to have food, they have to have a way to make income. They're logging, they're burning areas of forest to create areas for new crops, and they're fishing reefs that were tambu, but again, just need to be able to put dinner on the table.
Yeah, of course. And it's obviously particularly challenging in these economies that have been so shut off, and we're so dependent on tourism. And hopefully we'll be able to change those things with some reforestation projects in the near future. Well, I wanted to ask you, the Pacific Islands specifically are considered to be one of the first places to be really badly affected by climate change. And you did mention the cyclones. So have you seen the impacts of climate change since you've been in Fiji? And then what is your feeling on the sentiment in Fiji about the changes happening to our climate, and how aware are people of what's going on?
Yeah, here you see it every day. So you're really aware of climate change and how it's affecting people here. So people here are very switched on. They know exactly what's happening because they see it. We've had just this past cyclone season, which we're coming to the end of. We had a Category 5 cyclone, and it was our second Category 5 cyclone within 5 years. So where it hit directly, I mean, roofs and houses were demolished, but also trees were just ripped off. It was really extensive damage, lots of mangrove loss as well. And we've been diving the reefs afterwards, and just huge boulders full of reef have collapsed. So many overturned corals, just lots and lots of damage. And it's happening more and more frequently. We've even seen the coastline in front of our house erode by several feet this year because of those cyclones. But Fiji's getting an increasing number of these really strong storms. And they're also constantly doing things like building seawalls. They've already had to relocate a few villages, and that's something that's becoming more and more of a problem. And as I said about land use, I mean, Fijians are really land rich. That is like their biggest thing. So if you're forcing a village to relocate, they're essentially giving away all they have. It's their ancestral land. It's everything to them. So it's a really big problem, and it's something that is in the news here a lot. And there's a lot of initiatives to try to combat that. But at the moment, it's also difficult because if you get a big developer in and they have a lot of money, it can be difficult sometimes for, the Ministry of the Environment and then the government to try to stop them from doing exploitative developments. But it's a small country, so people know what's going on, and they're not blind to climate change. They're not blind to what causes it. But yeah, we're definitely feeling it a lot here. You don't talk to anyone who doesn't believe in it, because you just see it all the time.
Yeah, I can imagine. And on that note, I guess, do you have any tips or suggestions for people who want to support conservation and, prevent climate change, but maybe aren't ready to go all the way into moving to Fiji and dedicating their lives to it? Like, how can people give back and live more sustainably while living at home, staying home?
While staying home. Yeah, I think just really watching your carbon output and just making some choices. It doesn't have to be like a huge lifestyle change, but just making some, thoughtful choices each day, each week, to maybe cut down things like meat consumption, to just, think about what kind of footprint you're leaving behind. And like I said, here, before living in an area that is really impacted by climate change, I never thought about things like, a longer shower or, where my electricity was coming from. So there's a lot that we can just become more aware of what we actually do and what our footprint is. And we can just demand more of, our political leaders, of companies that are kind of, causing a lot of this change, because it's not these small island nations like Fiji in the South Pacific that are causing this big shift here. They're just seeing a lot of the effects firsthand. So it's these larger countries, wealthier countries that have a bigger carbon footprint that are really causing the change that we see here in Fiji. And then supporting small NGOs, so, giving your time and when you can, your funding to, small grassroots organizations that are on the ground, working with local communities. And when tourism starts again, putting your dollars behind like ecotourism, small scale, going out and really experiencing a culture and getting your hands and feet dirty, and going to explore some of the more really remote parts that don't get that type of tourism can be really supportive. And if you go out to the reefs, for example, in a lot of places, you're paying like a reef entry fee. And so without that this year, it's difficult for protection, because there's no money for, the wardens, the custodians of these reefs. But hopefully travel will open up again. And when that happens, it would be wonderful if there was a bit of a shift from kind of the resort-based holiday to more of a community-based holiday, to really get out there and kind of spread your money throughout communities that normally don't see it.
It's almost like you wrote an advertisement for Friends of Wallacea. And obviously we're hoping to be able to operate in Fiji as soon as the borders reopen. So I appreciate the shout out for the tourism industry, because I do think that is a really good way of giving back and making sure that the communities that are taking care of these places get the funding that they need. Obviously, I'm a bit biased, but I completely agree. Well, I wanted to ask you, I know you have tons of amazing anecdotes from living in Fiji, because a lot of ridiculous things happen sometimes when you're living out in the field. But what is the craziest or coolest thing you've seen out in the field? I guess it doesn't have to be in Fiji, but it may well be after 5 years there.
I've been so lucky on my Opwall Field experiences. Just my kind of life dream before signing up for Opwall was to swim with a whale shark, and I was able to do that in Honduras. And Oh, even my first expedition in South Africa was incredible. I mean, we saw leopards mating off the side of the road. We saw all of the Kruger Big Five before 8 in the morning one day. And it was just incredible. We saw like hippos and rhinos in some of our habitat survey areas. So it started off wild, and I think every year, I've had some amazing experience. In Fiji, we've had one morning during the field season last year in 2019, when we had our last field season, we all woke up at probably around 6 in the morning, and it was this really calm morning, and there was just a whale right in front of like our dive center, right in front of our little bay that we're in, and it came so close to shore, and it was just amazing to see something so big so close. And we've also, just a couple of weeks ago, we were swimming off of the coast of Vusiratu, which is one of the villages and communities that Operation Wallacea works closely with. My partner Matthew and I are helping out with an ecotourism incentive in Vusiratu, so that when borders open up, they can take their own tourists and do homestays and just generate their own income. So we were looking for a coral restoration site and just swam out into the blue, and we got surrounded by gray reef sharks and then a silver tip shark. And so that was a pretty intense day out snorkeling. So yeah, we've seen a lot. I think the shark encounters are normally my favorite, but yeah, I have, gosh, such a long list of amazing experiences from being in the field with Opwall.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine after 13 years, you would have seen quite a lot of amazing things. So before we finish up, I have one more question, but I wanted to ask you to very quickly paint a little visual picture of where, a verbal picture of where your dive site is, because it's such an amazing place. And it's hard to imagine these places exist on Earth. Could you just kind of give a perspective of what it looks like to look up at your dive site and what you see?
Oh gosh, yeah. So again, it's the largest bay in the South Pacific, but we hardly ever see a boat go by, and when we do, it's a small fiber, and some of the villages lining this bay only have transportation by boat. So if they want to get into town, they have to take a boat to another village and then get a bus to go into town. So it's incredibly quiet. I mean, where we live, if we and at night we don't see a single light anywhere, unless someone's driving along the other side of the bay, and we might see headlights for a little while. So it's extremely quiet. We get horses and wild pigs and things like that coming by the house at all hours. And then the dive sites themselves, I mean, they're really incredible. I mean, really healthy coral, and you'll be the only people on site. You'll be the only boat, that you can see. So it's one of those places that really gives you hope. It's like, oh, there's still places like this that exist, and it's a really large area. It's huge. It's we can't even see the end of the bay from where we are, and it's just so colorful. We after Cyclone Yasa hit, basically everything around us was all brown, and it was depressing. There wasn't much life around us, but it's so rainy. It's so it's so undisturbed that things have already grown back. I mean, there's leaves on all the trees now. It's the reefs are recovering. There's already some new recruitment, and yeah, it shows you that if nature's just kind of left to do its own thing, it's pretty resilient. And so we're surrounded just by nature. It's beautiful. It's really, really colorful. We don't see a lot of pollution, for example, because it's so underpopulated where we are. And yeah, it's just not many people out here, so you really do feel like you're out in a really remote place, even though you're on the second largest island in the country.
Yeah, it's a really magical place. And I remember there were some areas where you could stand out, on the parts of the reef that get beached or get bare during low tide, and just see the reef because the water is so clear, and then the green mountains coming up behind because everything is just tropical green, and it looks fake. It's amazing.
Yeah, it does. It's all like postcard worthy. It's amazing.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, it's just big mountains lining the bay, and just nature for as far as you can see. It's pretty spectacular.
It really is. Well, to end us out on a positive note, why do you personally believe we should keep fighting to protect biodiversity and prevent climate change? And really, what gets you out of bed in the morning? if it's not a cold shower.
Yeah, that's part of it. Well, for us, being in a place that is like this, we know it's unusual these days, and we're lucky to be in an area that's completely underdeveloped. But there's so many people here who are interested in protecting it. And when you've got kind of most of the local community on board to begin with, it feels like there's limitless potential. I mean, things will always move really slow here because of the nature of, first off, being in a remote area. But that's also a good thing. If things move too quickly, you'll get development moving too quickly. So we're really happy to be in a place where we can actually have an impact by, first off, like going to villages and doing small talks, doing a bit of education, now that we don't have tourism at the moment. So it might be a bit of a strain on us because we don't have income at the moment, but we're able to do some of the things that we really want to do in Fiji. So Matthew and I and Ocean Ventures Fiji are working on doing the first coral restoration sites in Natewa Bay, especially after seeing the damage after Cyclone Yasa. So there's that. There's education projects. Matthew and I put together like an online version of our reef ecology course. So we're definitely shifting more towards education, and finding a bit of a niche in education while tourism is completely shut down. It's hard for us financially, but it's given us a lot more time to do the things that really matter to us. So if Matthew and I, and if Ocean Ventures Fiji can do something to give back to Fiji and the incredible marine environment, then we can go to bed happy. That's really what we want to accomplish in life, is just having some kind of good impact on the ocean, because we love it so much. Yeah, getting out of bed in the morning, if I can be in the water, if I can be close to the water, then I'm happy. This is exactly where I want to be.
Well, that's a fantastic way to finish us off. And since you obviously do, you run your own business, where can people find Ocean Ventures online if they want to learn more about the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so we have a website. It's oceanventuresfiji.com. And we're also on Facebook and Instagram at Ocean Ventures Fiji. And then we have our online course available, and you can find that off of our website as well in online resources. So yeah, we've got a bit of an online presence. Matthew and I are also amateur, but we really love doing underwater photography, and trying to show why this area is so special through photos and why it needs protecting.
Yeah, I saw one of your photos pop up on Tourism Fiji's Facebook page the other day. So congratulations.
Yeah.
And yeah, anyone who wants to see amazing pictures of underwater Fiji should check out what Ocean Ventures is doing. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Sara, and for fighting through the rain. And it's
sunny again now.
Yes, I can see that. That's island life, isn't it?
It is unpredictable and wet.
Well, it was wonderful to talk to you and hear your story. And thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, Vanakavakalevu, Sophia. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Opwall's Field Notes. We hope you are daydreaming of Fiji's rainbow reef systems as we learned from Sara's experience living on these remote islands. Please do be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts to stay up to date on new episodes about conservation and biodiversity hotspots around the world, coming soon on Opwall's Field Notes.